Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the third and final session of the Pentaward Festival Spring Edition. Up next, we have one of the most unbelievable speakers we've ever had at the Pentawards. Her name is Camille de Dominicis. She's the co-founder and brand director of Eminente by Moët Hennessy. And, you know, I met Camille over 4 years ago. She was actually one of the first people I met when I joined the Pentawards, and we've remained very good friends. And she's been very helpful along on my journey when we are introducing and starting new things. Camille is a very enthusiastic, passionate brand builder. And she's spent the last 10 years working internationally with some of the world's biggest brands like L'Oreal, like Christian Dior, Moët Hennessy, and Chandon. You know, following Camille's presentation, we are going to be asking your questions. So please type them in the Q&A box below, and we'll be answering them at the end. So don't be shy. Please post any of your interesting thoughts and pictures on the Pentawards using the hashtag Pentawards Spring Festival. So without further ado, our last session of the day, it's over to Camille.
Thank you, Adam, and I'm super pleased to be introducing you to this amazing journey of launching Eminente, and I hope that you're going to enjoy a nice Cuban trip that's going to start now. But before everything, and before I'm able to introduce you to the journey of launching a brand during COVID time, I'm going to ask you one very simple question. Have you ever been to Cuba? There's a poll that's going to appear in front of you. I'm just going to ask you to answer by yes if you've been, or no if you've not been, but you're dying to go to Cuba. Oh, that's interesting. I see that actually most of you have never been to Cuba. So this is going to be your Cuban introduction. And some of you actually have been. Let me just stop the presentation because due to some technicalities, it doesn't work if I don't start it again. And we're back. So actually, it's quite interesting. Most of you have never been, so most of you must be dying to go. And I'm sure that you will agree, actually, the one who've been and the one who've not been, I'm sure that you have amazing images of Cuba in your mind, because actually Cuba makes people dream. It is by far, among more than 80 countries producing rum, the country that makes people dream the most. And I'm sure that when you think about Cuba, you have amazing imaginary in your mind, like this one, you know, the beautiful colored street of Havana, the old American cars, you know, riding the streets of Havana. Of course, the Che and the revolution, the Cuban revolution, the famous one, the cigars, of course, being part of the Cuban culture. And the music, the dancing, you know, the salsa. And I'm sure that you had a glimpse of eBay, one of the famous duo, when joining the Pentawards, when you were able to listen to that amazing music. But yes, definitely music and dancing is part of the Cuban culture. And I'm sure this is going to make you dream. And I'm sorry because it is quite tough on a Wednesday. But of course, the beautiful hotel complex of Varadero, where you can just enjoy some nice cocktails as well. And obviously, not to say, 3 of the most iconic cocktails in the world coming from Cuba. Obviously, from left to right, the Cuban daiquiri, the Cuba Libre, and the mojito. But all of that is amazing and is what we like to qualify as the Cuban postcard. But actually, the Cuba I want to talk to you today is a Cuba that actually lies beneath the surface, actually lies, you know, behind closed door, where I'm going to introduce you to a Cuba that is slightly more unexpected, something that is not about just, you know, ticking the TripAdvisor list of what are the top 10 things to do in Cuba, but it's like something that is slightly off the beaten track, you know, a Cuba that you have to dig to discover, something that is just amazing because it's super wide. And it's true that Cuba is the biggest island of the Caribbean. It actually is called the green lung of the Caribbean because it is super wild. There is only little pesticides in Cuba, and actually a fauna and a flora that is just incredible. This is what you could see, for example, at sunset or sunrise in Cuba. This amazing landscape, super wide. And these are, the local people that you might find, on the road, whether it is on the side of a sugarcane field like this, people just having a nice coconut water, or whether it is in a paladar that is a at-home restaurant where you would enjoy the most finest cuisine of Cuba, or probably just enjoying the sunset, at the top of a Viñales hill, enjoying a nice glass of Eminente. And obviously, and if you're quite lucky, you will finally understand the local anecdote that says that actually some Cuban call their home Isla del Cocodrilo, because when you look at the shape of the island, it has the shape of the Cuban crocodile. And actually, within the 3,000 species of fauna and flora in Cuba, is the Cuban crocodile that the Cubans are trying to protect. And this was actually the inspiration behind the storytelling of Eminente and the creation of Eminente, that actually is an invitation for people to scratch beneath the surface of Cuba to discover, a wider Cuba, a more unexpected Cuba, what we could almost call the untainted Cuba. This is Eminente, a new Cuban rum that was produced by Moët Hennessy, that is produced by Moët Hennessy, and on which we have been working over the last 3 years, and I've personally been working over the last 3 years. If we had to sum up what Eminente is, Eminente is a new Cuban rum coming from the heart of the island, local called Isla de Cocodrilo, because its unusual shape resembled that of its native crocodile. Eminente is actually imagined by the youngest Cuban Maestro Ronero, so rum master, which is the official title for a master of rum in Cuba, César Martí. And César, he had a vision. He wanted to create and to bring back that taste of ancient eau de vie from Cuba, 19th century Cuban sugarcane eau de vie. And the way he has done it is by looking at the most flavorful eau de vie that we call on the island aguardientes. So this is the story of the brand. On paper, it looks amazing. And this is on this that we've been working over the last 3 years. But actually, one of the key highlights and the stuff that I want to share with you today is actually we launched that brand in September 2020, which is right in the middle of COVID. And I'm going to try to share with you, and for the sake of time, I only picked some of what I believe could be good takeaways to take from this experience, stuff that I want to share with you that I strongly believe could make the difference if you were about to launch a new brand today, and especially in a COVID time. The first one, I've called it overcommit to product. Otherwise, product USP, product USP, product USP. Today, and this probably will sound very familiar to you because they are trends that actually exist for quite a long time and actually started before the COVID. But I believe that, the strange time in which we are living literally just enhanced them a bit more. It is about transparency. It is about the consumer having spent months at home looking for the stuff on internet, being able to compare elements and just wanting to know more about what is inside the product. And so I believe today that, since people are looking for more transparency, more authenticity, they want to know what is inside the product, and they want to know, how the product is made and how does the product do good actually. And so I guess people, are willing today to pay more but just for what is worth paying more for. And if we look at the way we've tackled that challenge with Eminente, I would take 4 key highlights and 4 elements to really consider when launching a brand. First is obviously offer strong product USP. Your consumer might not be experts, so give them product USPs that they can understand. This is where, that notion of aguardientes come for Eminente Reserva. Aguardientes being the most flavorful eau de vie that the island can produce. Basically, what we've done is we've put for Eminente Reserva, which is a 7-year-old minimum, 70% of aguardiente, which basically is the highest percentage of all Cuban rum. This, even if you're not a rum expert, just give you a clue of how qualitative the product can be. But this is not enough. then you obviously need to reassure the consumer. But how can you give reassurance to the consumer? In our case, the way we've done it is we've been looking at, being part of that, what we call the Denominación de Origen Protegida, which we call basically the DOP, which dictates, if you're a Cuban rum, the way Cuban rum should be made. And it just reassures you that the product is super qualitative and that it just follows the strict rule of how to make a Cuban rum. So this is something that we've been looking at. And obviously, this is very much tailored to the product itself. But obviously, the way you make your product is also the way you make your packaging. And obviously, something that is super important to consider is to maximize the use, obviously, of recycled material. And here, in the case of Eminente, the entire packaging, the bottle, is made of either 100% recycled elements or recyclable elements. The example being, for example, on the labels, we've been looking at cotton byproduct coming from the textile industry. It has that very nice craft and raw feeling when you touch it, so it's super nice. The same way we've been looking at a cork that is made using wood from FSC forest, so something that is super controlled and that is super strict in terms of the way we can produce it. The last point about the way you make the product is obviously, if you are able to do so, eliminate unnecessary packaging and reduce carbon footprint. This is not a big surprise, but here is a big commitment that we've made for Eminente. In the industry, it is very easy to say that, to be sold, a bottle needs to come with an extra gift box. Actually, we made a commitment that Eminente Reserva is with no gift box. And this was a real commitment, as well as where we would be able to produce the bottle. Cuba does not produce the bottle. So the way we've basically reduced our carbon footprint was to look at the closest country producing glass, that was Mexico. And this is where we've decided to produce the glass bottle. My second advice to you would be, use packaging as your primary communication canva. I think, we talk a lot about the trend of experiential luxury that has been holding up in the new normal world. And I believe this all starts with packaging, because in a world where e-commerce has been rising like crazy over the past month, and where we have unfortunately less human connection, I believe that your packaging need to be the entry point to your storytelling. And even more so, if I take the example of wine and spirits, we see that, and especially in the rum, people still use price and packaging as the most classic way to navigate the category. So your packaging is essential in the storytelling that it's going to deliver. And basically, it needs to speak for itself. It cannot just be about, having someone to tell about the product or for the consumer to look for the information. I think the product needs to speak for itself. And actually, there is as well a big trend that is, how can you use your packaging to go beyond just what it has to offer and actually embrace as well your brand purpose? What does it say that goes beyond basically what the product USP? And I think, that in the case of Eminente, we looked at the packaging to be an invitation to really challenge the perception that you have of stuff, to scratch beneath the surface of culture. And here we're talking, of course, about Cuba. And basically, we want people to challenge the perception that they have of Cuba and, of course, of Cuban rum. And actually, I was actually reading a lot of stuff about the new trend in luxury, where I believe more and more we are looking at a more understated and a more simple luxury. This is very true, but it doesn't mean that your packaging should not challenge the codes of your category. You need to disrupt the category. And for me, that would be something super important, because it doesn't mean that because of COVID, people will less innovate. I believe that this is actually the contrary. And some research that we've been looking at showcase that people are actually even more creative under constraint. So don't expect competition to hold back and not innovate. Just be, on top of the game in terms of the product innovation, and basically just make your product shine, tell a story, but as well disrupt the category so that it will be seen. And in that same dynamic, I would say that one of the funny things that we realized, doing the different packaging exercise for Eminente and doing consumer research, is that I would encourage you to not be afraid of being polarizing. And if I take the example of the bottle that you have in front of you, with that crocodile storytelling, what is funny is that at the very beginning, we had different stories, we had different packaging. And when we run the very first consumer research, one of the things that we realized is that bottle, I mean, the old version of it before it was actually finalized, was not the one that was getting most of the positive vote, but it was the one that was being talked the most. And I guess this is where I realized that being polarizing sometimes is more important than pleasing, everyone. It's not about making sure that most people will like the packaging, but actually that people will like it as much as they will hate it, but they will just not stop talking about it. And this is what happened with that bottle. And the thing that we realized, and this is where we really sense that potential, is that people were talking about it. Whether they liked it or not, they could just not stop talking about it. And finally, and I think this is quite in line actually with the previous point I was mentioning about how do you make your packaging, how sustainable it is. Now there is a new trend, and I think we are trying to embrace it as well with Eminente, is what is the second life of your packaging? Encourage upcycling of your packaging. And this is an example of the content that you will be able to see on our Instagram page. Is we realized very soon that actually people loved giving a second life to the bottles of Eminente. And this is just great. And I think this is something that every one of us should be encouraging, is what is the thing that you can do with your packaging that is not just about the initial purpose of it? And I think this could be a very long trend, and probably one of the key highlights of the way we want to activate the brand today. Third point, make your brand culturally relevant. I think what I've seen and trying to define the type of consumer that we wanted to tap into, we realize that today branding content is over. And actually, it's about the brand to make itself interesting in the eyes of the consumer and not the contrary. And I believe, that notion of being consumer centric is super relevant. And I would even more say culturally centric. How do you make your brand culturally relevant? And if I had three examples to give you, is that notion of organic influence. I think, people have been spending the last month at home scrolling internet, scrolling social media. And I think people more and more can spot miles away the notion of paid and obvious influence marketing. Instead, what we've seen and the trend that we see with the type of consumer which we're trying to attract is that people are more and more looking for a variety of unbiased recommendation sources, whether it be media or people. And so basically what I would really encourage you to do is, instead of going straight away to obvious paid influence, what are the people, what are the media that actually talk to your consumer, and what is the natural connection you can make with them? It's really about understanding the type of conversation your brand should be creating so that it will interest the end consumer. Because don't believe, and I think this is a challenge that we have in wine and spirit especially, is on paper, I'm not convinced people follow very naturally a brand of spirit. So what is it that we can create as content that will really interest the end consumer? The second point will be a bit in the same dynamic. Where do you need your brand to be seen? And that notion of telegraphic distribution that actually is going to signal the type of brands you are to your end consumer. So basically look, and this would be one of my key insights as well, is know your consumer. What are the consumer tribes that you're trying to tap into? And once you've defined this, where are they hanging out? Obviously here, and I've put a picture of a bar, which we all cross our finger will reopen soon. It's not the case at the moment, but basically look at all the distribution channels that you can encounter and where exactly, but in a very granular way, where exactly are your consumer tribes hanging out and how can you make your brand present there? And finally, and this is very true, especially in wine and spirit, when usually most of the business is done, through hotels, restaurants, and bars. Obviously, large events might not happen in 2021, and community-sized event will probably what will prevail this year. And so basically, but still a very interesting insight is that most of the consumers are fed up with their online life. So they want the real connection. They want something that happens in the real life. So how does your brand can create on-point activation, on-point rendezvous for the consumers to really enjoy that moment of that might be more, intimate and gathering small communities around you. But what are these moments that your brand can tap into? And the final one that is probably cliche and everyone could have guessed, what would have been in that presentation, but is so true, is test, learn, and adapt. This is something that we've been encountering launching Eminente is things never go as you planned. And one of my first advice to you would be embrace that resilient mindset. And it's quite funny because in Cuba, that resilient mindset, we call it the resolver mindset, which is basically how can you be creative despite adversity and using what you have at hand. And I think this is a culture that you need to embrace when launching a new brand, because you cannot plan what's going to happen in 6 weeks. Who could have planned 3 years ago when we were planning to launch Eminente that actually COVID will happen? And we have changed our plans many times, and it's always about testing, learning, and quickly adapt. Most of the entrepreneurs that I meet are telling me, today we don't have the luxury of just keeping doing stuff that do not work. And today it's really about understanding what doesn't work, as well as understanding what works, maximize what is working, and just leave on the side what doesn't work. And I'm telling you, so many times I've had an idea that in the end just could not make the cut. And at some point you have to be fine with that. You have to accept the fact that it cannot just be the way you've planned, but probably you can come up with a much better and on-point idea. And remember, that's the last point of that embrace the resilient mindset, is there is no one size fits all. And that's very frustrating sometimes. But indeed, even looking at geographical expansion, there is no one same model that we've applied today for Eminente. So it's all about the notion of tailoring your plan to the type of market you're going after, the type of consumer you're going after, so that it really makes sense in the end. And my final advice would be on that notion of consumer centricity and that notion of consumer insight and A/B test. Basically, as I was telling you, I think you have to know your audiences, know exactly who you want to talk to, who do you want to talk to, and who are the consumers that actually buy into your brand DNA, so that you create a real natural connection, an organic connection, as we were saying a few seconds ago. So understand your audience interest. Today, you have many tools available to do social listening. As I was saying, people want to go back into their real life, but still people express themselves on social life, on social media life. And you have many tools today to understand what are their topic of interest, what are the conversation in which you can then tap into. And I think this should really be a motto, a guidance in terms of how do you create that entertaining brand content. And finally, that notion of A/B test. When you're a small brand and you don't have the big budget of a big brand, you have to A/B test everything you do. Because sometimes you might think that you have created, for example, the right content for the right specific consumer, but it might turn out that it's not the case. So use A/B test. I mean, just looking at the way paid social, for example, works, sometimes with small budget, you can just run A/B test, look what is working, and just then change or maximize what works, and just leave on the side what doesn't work, and run instant performance analysis. It's not about gathering with your team every 6 months and looking at what has worked over the past 6 months. It's about being on a daily performance analysis. And I believe this gives you so many insights, so many learning. And obviously, looking at my adventure, my Cuban adventure over the past 3 years, I've learned so much. And this is because we've been paying attention so much to who we want to address, and just challenging yourself. I think that would be my last word. Challenge yourself, and don't be afraid to fail, because I think failure is part of the process to make your brand even stronger. So that's it for me. Muchas gracias. And if you have any question, I will be pleased to answer them.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. Absolutely incredible. And there's been lots of questions and lots of activity in the chat. So first of all, some compliments. There's
Thank
people
you.
in the chat saying, the bottle is beautiful. How do I buy it? When can we get it? So I don't want to be horrible and make people jealous at home, but I do
Wow.
have the beautiful bottle here. And I'm going to be honest, usually you see fantastic images of packaging and products. And then when you get the packaging, sometimes it doesn't live up or vice versa. But the bottle in the flesh and the images, you guys have done an absolutely wonderful job. So congratulations. We do have a question actually. And it kind of starts off with your background. You know, you worked at Hennessy and on the portfolio there, and then you've gone on to a new brand. How has that been for you, working with a really established brand and now having to establish a new brand?
You know, I think working for the big brand is an amazing school, especially as a marketeer. You learn so much because you know you work for the big players and they already have such an established history, you know, and a savoir-faire and all of that is so nurturing in the career of a marketeer that I've basically learned everything there. And I guess at some point, you know, it's about what you want to do next. Whether it is, you know, an international career or something. And in my case, it was just wanting to go a bit off the beaten track. And I think, you know, that notion of being able to, you know, run a startup in a big group is just a unique chance. And I think this is the chance I was given, and I'm so grateful for it because it's just everything I've learned is impressive, and the amazing people that I've been working with over the past 3 years is as well, you know, something extraordinary in the life of a marketeer. So I guess, you know, it was really about a chance that was given to me, of being able to go off the beaten track for a bit, and learning what it is to be an intrapreneur, as we call it. So that's it. Yeah.
Great. And we did have a chat yesterday, and you actually said, you know, working with external companies and people, they, you know, they have to buy into the whole concept and the whole culture. And I think you summarized yesterday saying that was something that happened very easily and naturally. How important is that, you know, working with external people and then being on the same wavelength as you?
Yeah, I think, you know, and I guess this would be one of my advice in terms of how can you get people that are in the same, that share the same brand DNA as you do. And because I believe that, you know, the adventure of Eminente, apart from the official launch being, you know, it's September 2020, was actually an amazing adventure beforehand, and the dynamics that you can create with people around you, whether they are in the company you're working with or outside of the company. And in my case, it was a bit of both, you know, and I think that's the chance that we had of being part of Moët Hennessy, was relying on the expertise of internal people, as well as being able to recruit amazing talent around us, among which obviously is Stranger and Stranger, who has been designing the bottle, among which is Leo Zers, who is our creative agency and strategic agency, who has been working side by side with us, and other talents around us that have just made the magic come through. And I guess this, in terms of who do you recruit, and that feeling of, you know, being entrepreneur themselves, as well as sharing the same desire and the same brand DNA, because I believe that everyone, you know, needs to express the brand DNA and live the brand. You know, this is, before everything, it's a human adventure. So I think this is where the magic started for us. It was that gathering of amazing people, brilliant minds around us, and I guess this is why we all enjoyed that adventure so much.
Great. And we've got one time for one final question. I hope you don't mind. And this is quite a nice one, really. It's you know, you've asked if any of us have been to Cuba, and I'm sure many will agree we now all want to go. Once travel restrictions are lifted and go back to normal, where would you like to go on your first opportunity to get out of where you're based?
Good question. I think, well, definitely, I'm dying to go back to Cuba. Obviously, most of you will understand that, you know, launching a brand in COVID, a Cuban brand in COVID, is not an easy task, because it makes travel to Cuba less frequent. So definitely, I already know that the next trip I will do definitely is in Cuba. And I would say probably the country I would like to go next is Mexico. You know, I miss the Mexican vibe, and probably yes, I would say Mexico. Mexico will be on my wish list.
Great. Well, everybody in the UK is currently crying because it's meant to be spring, but it's raining. So this makes us dream of happier times and places. And thank you again from everybody at Pentwoods and all the viewers for your wonderful presentation. It was fantastic. And just to let everybody know at home, if you have missed any of today's presentations, they will be available on demand. It's been a fantastic first day at the Pentwoods Festival Spring Edition. I want to thank the speakers all from today, and of course my team and everybody watching. You can now continue the conversation on our social media channels at Pentwoods and using the hashtag Pentwoods Spring Festival. We'll be back tomorrow at 11:30 sharp GMT time with more speakers from Supple Studio, Carrefour, and you said it already, Stranger and Stranger. And just to let everybody know that currently the Pentwoods competition is open. So if you want more details, please visit our website at www.pentwoods.com. I'm Adam Ryan, this is Camille, and we want to thank you once again for being part of day one of our Pentwoods.
And if I may, I want to say thank you very much, Adam, and your team for welcoming me. And if I can invite everyone to follow Eminente on Instagram, we will be very pleased. And I know one of the questions was about how to get the bottle. Actually, Eminente.com delivery is free across UK, France, Germany, and Czech Republic. So up to your orders.
Great. Well, on that note, we're about to have a few sips of your beautiful rum, and have a wonderful evening and stay safe. And everybody at home, please stay safe and take care. Bye. Bye. Bye-bye.